our planning. We've extended our planning areas to include the entire county. And so we also have representatives from the rural portions of the county that are not urbanized. But the voting members of the council are generally consisting of those areas that are considered urbanized by the Census Bureau and have a core area that has a population of over 50,000 people. We also are part of a larger area called a TMA, which is a transportation management area, which is 3 counties. And those 3 counties include Orange and Dutchess, and believe it or not, actually extend into a portion of the state of New Jersey. So those counties are also what they call MPOs. And we participate collectively in terms of a lot of the transit decisions that need to be made that are intra-county.
Thanks, Dennis. That's essentially my presentation. Any questions? Just kidding. My name is Brian Slack. I'm Principal Transportation Planner for the Transportation Council. I've worked for UCTC for about the past 11 years. I'm a Kingston resident. I'm also the coordinator of traffic safety for Ulster County government. And that is a body created by the Ulster County Legislature through the charter. And we meet monthly to discuss issues of traffic safety throughout the county. And I also sit on a variety of local boards and committees. The main committee that comes to mind is the Kingston Complete Streets Advisory Committee that I participate in directly, but there are several others, and we participate upon request and as needed. I'd like to share my screen now. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. If you could, presentation I put together, the general focus originally was an overview of the UCTC, but also with a more in-depth focus on public transit. I think we're going to cover the whole enchilada, as Cheryl had indicated, but if there's certain areas that you'd like me to go more in depth, you can certainly raise those during the Q&A. And I want to give attribution where it's due. We developed this presentation over several years with the assistance of our partners throughout the region and the state. So the first thing I want to draw members' attention to is our website, and that is hosted by the Ulster County website. So if you go to ulstercountynewyork.gov/transportation-council, you'll get to the UCTC website. You can also Google Ulster County Transportation Council. And a few things of note just to orient yourself. On the left-hand column of the page, you'll find all of the materials that I'm going to be discussing today. They're all available for review and download if you just go through that menu. And the other thing that I wanted to make you aware of is if you would like to be added to our mailing list, it's hosted through MailChimp. It's very easy to sign up, and you can indicate your areas of interest, particularly general interest and meeting notifications, and then you'll receive all of our meeting notifications automatically. We do not send out very many emails. We try to keep it at a minimum. So as Dennis mentioned, we're a metropolitan planning organization, which is a relatively unique creation. It's a creation of the federal government. And there are presently 14 metropolitan planning organizations active in New York State. And those are shown here. MPOs were created, first created in 1962 through an act of the US Congress. And if you know your history, as I'm sure all of you do, that was a period in time after we had massive expansion and investment in the interstate system in the United States. And at a certain point in 1962, Congress decided, since we're investing so much money into transportation, shouldn't we also have a mechanism to plan for future investments for transportation? And that's where the MPO framework was created in 1962 through that Surface Transportation Authorization Act. And then the MPO role was expanded again in 1973 through the Authorization Acts, the Surface Transportation Acts. And every time we have a new Authorization Act, which is roughly every 5 years, the role of the MPO is further defined and refined through those authorization acts. And I'm going to get into this in greater detail. The purpose of an MPO is at its bones is to provide a forum for the discussion of transportation issues and policies and planning and decision-making. And the entire framework was really designed in mind for allowing local decision makers to have a say in the federal transportation planning process. So who we are, designated MPO for Ulster County. This MPO was created in 2003, and that's when the Kingston urbanized area, after Census 2000, met the threshold for becoming an MPO. And as Dennis noted, those are required by the federal government for any urbanized area of 50,000 people or more, and that's the Kingston urbanized area. As I mentioned, we're a forum for establishing transportation policies, planning and decision-making. And this forum was originally described by Congress as the 3C planning process, which is still used today. It refers to continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive, which describes what the MPO transportation planning process should be. Who we are specifically in Ulster County, we have 2.5 full-time employees. And that sounds relatively strange, but it's not when you consider that Dennis Doyle is mainly the director of the planning department, which is responsible for the Ulster County Planning Board. And then there's myself, full-time employee Brian Slack, and I think many of you have probably met David Stoss, our transportation planner, senior transportation planner. He's also our data and resource manager as well. So the interesting arrangement that we have, because we are technically a federal entity, we're actually hosted by the Ulster County Planning Department through a contractual agreement between Ulster County and the New York State DOT. So my salary is funded through federal grants, so is David's. And when we are able to utilize other staff from the planning department, we can reimburse the county for that time using our federal grants as well.
So just if I may, just understanding that hosting agreement requires consensus among those folks that are participatory in the process. So you need to have the urbanized area, chief elected officials of the urbanized area agree in terms of where the Transportation Council should be hosted. And so back in 2003 and continuing, we've had agreement from those individuals that are involved that host agreement should be with Ulster County.
Right. And as Dennis also mentioned, we're part of a larger thing called the Mid-Hudson Valley Transportation Management Area, and I'll explain that in further detail in just a moment. So the council is a body made up of, our framework is set up in a manner that allows for every municipality to have a role in the Transportation Council. We have 25 villages, towns, and cities in Ulster County, and each one is represented on the council in some way. We have 6 permanent voting members, which include the largest municipalities, as well as Ulster County. And the chief elected official from those municipalities is designated as the voting member. And they can select a voting proxy to vote in their place if they're not able to make those meetings. So it's Ulster County, City of Kingston, Town of Saugerties, and Town of Ulster, as well as our partners at the state, New York State DOT, and the Thruway Authority are 6 permanent voting members. And then the towns split voting. Since we have a total, the voting board total is 14 voting members. So in order to accommodate everyone, every 2 years, we rotate between the more rural or slightly less populated villages within the county. So these are the other municipalities that rotate voting membership every 2 years. The municipalities highlighted in bold with the asterisk are the current voting members through June 2023. And then every other June, we flip over to the other municipalities. And then we have a relatively unique membership to accommodate our very rural townships that are shown here. And that's called the 7-is-1 Rural Voting Membership. Each of these municipalities essentially designates one of them to represent all of them, all 7 of them on the board as the voting member. And that's done by the Association of the Town Supervisors. And currently we have the town of Rochester, Supervisor Michael Baden, who is the representative of the rural voting membership. So that rounds out all of our 14 voting members. We also have advisory members, which are shown here. The Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration are chief among them. And I want to emphasize that we've mentioned before that we're a forum for transportation planning. And I think one of our most important roles for RUTA and for members of the public is as a liaison between these rather large, you could even say intimidating federal agencies. We communicate probably weekly with the Federal Highway Administration, maybe monthly with the Federal Transit Administration, and probably every other day with members of the New York State DOT, transportation, various divisions at New York State DOT. So we are in a unique position to act as a liaison between our local municipalities and those state and federal agencies. So the framework of the Transportation Council is shown here in this flow chart. As I mentioned, we have 2.5 full-time staff that are here to staff the council. And then we report first to the technical committee, which is essentially an advisory committee to our policy committee. And the policy committee, all the members we just showed you, is the final decision-making authority, also could be referred to as the executive arm of the UCTC. Note here that it may be of interest that UCAT has not been mentioned as a voting member. UCAT isn't a voting member because they're essentially a division of Ulster County government, and Ulster County, the Ulster County executive is the chair of the committee, and so therefore UCAT isn't recognized as a voting member, but they are very much an active member of the council through the technical committee.
We have a cooperative agreement with them.
That's right, and that's listed in the cooperative agreement as well, with also the city of Kingston, that we will share information and share data and work with each other in a cooperative fashion. Meetings are held essentially 6 meetings of each committee per year. So first, we typically would have a technical committee. The technical committee would make recommendations, and the policy committee meets the next month. We just had our policy committee meeting on Tuesday. We usually meet the 4th Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. If you sign up for the meeting mailing list, you can get those meeting agendas at least 10 days in advance. And we are presently still hosting those meetings remotely, at least have that option to participate remotely. And I don't know how long we'll be able to continue to do that, but we've been doing that at least since the pandemic had begun. The council is governed through operating procedures, which are laid out, available on the website. I'm not going to go into great detail, but I did want to make you aware that these exist, and it essentially outlines what constitutes a quorum, when we meet, how we will involve the public, how the meeting agendas should be arranged, that sort of thing, and all the major components of the UCTC. So again, Cheryl asked for the whole enchilada, which it covers quite a bit of information. I think back in graduate school, it was probably several weeks of lectures just covering the metropolitan planning process. So it's a lot more than we can cover in 30 minutes. But I did want to draw your attention to this link, and I'll provide these slides at the end of the meeting to everyone. But the entire scope of the MPO process is outlined in the Federal Regulations Subpart C under Chapter 23, the Metropolitan Transportation Planning and Programming. Everything is laid out in black and white in that section. So you can certainly refer to that for more information. But when it comes down to it, MPOs are responsible for 3 primary products, planning products. The first is the long-range transportation plan, which has to be developed every 5 years. Then the next is the transportation improvement program, which is a capital listing of all the federal aid projects within the planning area. And then the third one is the Unified Planning Work Program. And the UPW, what we call the UPWP. So the Transportation Improvement Program is the capital component of the process. The UPWP is the planning component of the process. And I'll show you where to find these documents and explain a little more of what they include. Also, if you're part of a larger transportation management area, you're required to do a congestion management process. And don't worry, I'll cover that more. So this flow chart shows the relationship of the documents, the main planning products to each other. The LRTP is, I mentioned, developed every 5 years. It's required to have a 20-year planning horizon. And we last developed ours in 2020. And so your TIP and your UPWP have to be in conformance with the goals that are outlined in your long-range plan. And these are all great resources to familiarize yourselves, and they have a wealth of information for you if you're interested in just learning about the transportation system in Ulster County. This is what the documents look like. And again, I can make hard copies available to you if you ever want them. You just have to just send me an email. I can make them available upon request. LRTP here, we're pretty happy with it, developed in 2020. And then this is the Transportation Improvement Program. This was recently, the TIP is developed every 2 to 3 years in coordination with New York State DOT and all statewide MPOs. We very recently went through a update to the TIP that took us several months, and that was adopted in July of 2022. And then the UPWP follows the state fiscal year, just to make it a little more confusing. And that's adopted typically every February or March of the year. So we'll be getting into developing the UPWP, and it will certainly become a focus of our discussions during technical and policy committee meetings in the next several months to come. And typically every January is when I present the new draft Unified Planning Work Program. And this is where you're going to find all the planning projects that the UCTC plans to complete within the near future. It includes our full operational budget for the department.
So I think it's important to note that all of these documents have to be approved by our federal partners. So we're not, and we have certain federal requirements that we have to meet, which change, quite frankly, with the changing in the authorizations that Brian mentioned. So when you look at this, it's not something that we have. There's discretion, but that discretion is also looked at through the lens of the federal requirements and the federal approvals. For example, when we look at processes that we have to use in terms of doing unified planning work programs or adopting the TIPs, they have to be consistent with the long-range transportation plan.
So now what I'm going to do is start to go into greater detail of what I think is of particular interest to this organization, and that's federal and other funding for public transit, or how the public transit system is funded in Ulster County. And that was one of the specific questions I think that was listed. So there's several primary sources of funding to fund a public transit system. The primary one is from the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration. And I think we could also make an argument, an easy argument, that the Federal Highway Administration provides funding that can support a public transit administration or a public transit system. New York State DOT also provides significant match resources through something called STOA. And then I think other agencies as well provide support for public transit. And then, of course, there's local funding sources. I'm going to go into great detail now on these different, the nuances of these different funding sources. So at the federal level, starting at the highest level up, there are two main grants that the FTA makes available to public transit agencies. And those are formula grants. And they're described by the literal section that they're written in the federal code as. The first is section 5307. These are 5307 funds. They're called the Urbanized Area Formula Grant Funds. And public transit operators can use those for capital purchases, for funding operations, or for providing maintenance to their systems.
And administration.
And administration, thank you. I left admin out.
Yeah.
And then the other major source of funding is called Section 5339 funds, and that's called the Bus and Bus Facility Program. And those funds can be used for capital improvements to your transit system. So purchase of buses, or electric bus charging equipment, or security equipment, or even construction of a bus facility, or a shelter, a transit shelter, something like that. That 5339 funds can be used for capital only. These funding sources, I think, are best understood when you consider the geographic areas that generate them. And those are generated by our census urbanized areas. And I think this map, we probably don't show it enough in meetings because it really clarifies how the funds are generated. First, you have the Kingston urbanized area, which is called small urbanized areas, SUSA 457. That number has a logical relation. We're the 457th largest small urbanized area in the country. And that changes obviously with every census. And then you have the Poughkeepsie, Newburgh, New York, New Jersey urbanized area, which stretches into Ulster County. And so the way the legislation is written is that these are formula funds that are generated based on the population density within these urbanized areas. And because we have two of them in Ulster County, we receive two separate sources of funds. This table shows some of the more recent funding that we've generated through those urbanized areas. And I realize it may take a moment to absorb it, but we have up at top, the Kingston urbanized area, we receive 5307 and 5339. And these are the funding amounts. We actually just approved most of these appropriations or the distributions rather at our Tuesday meeting. And so I'll describe how the funding flows from the federal government. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite understand that, but I think I'll make more sense of it in just a moment. But these are the main federal funding sources. They're consistent, they're reliable, and they're typically there every year. It's not all of our federal funding, but these are the big ones. And it's important to note that year to year, we generate just shy of $3 million total after the required 20% matches are provided by the local and state governments. But it's important to note that UCAT, typically our annual operating costs are roughly $7 million. So we're not able to fund the full system with our federal and state funds alone. It requires significant local additional funding in order to fund the system that we presently have.
And that includes state. When we say local, that includes state.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the way the funding flows go, the rules are outlined in the Federal Register under the latest Federal Surface Transportation Authorization Act. That bill was signed into law by the president with great fanfare in November of 2021. It's called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That defines how much money is going to be made available to public transit providers over the course of the 5-year bill. So then Congress authorizes an appropriation of federal funds for various purposes under those different sections, section 5307, et cetera. And then the program funds are apportioned to each state based on a formula, which is primarily population of the census areas. Then New York State DOT takes that apportionment, and they, at the central office, will then allocate the apportionment throughout the entire state of New York. And that allocation goes to the individual MPOs, it goes to the TMAs, and it also, funding is left over for the rural areas as well. That's how the distribution works through formula. Once we receive that notice from the state, the UCTC is responsible for distributing the funds to designated recipients of public transit. Those are operators of public transit within the county. A designated recipient must be a public body, and it must be an operator of a public transit service that is eligible to receive the funds. And so the only public operator within Ulster County is UCAT. Ulster County government is the sole DR in Ulster County, and they're responsible for UCAT. So transit projects may be a bus purchase, it may be use of funds for operations, for administration, whatever it is, it's got to be part of what's called a plan of projects that UCAT is responsible to develop. And it's supposed to typically cover a 5-year period. And all those projects, once they're agreed upon and funded, have to be included on a transportation improvement program. And that's the tip. And that's where you can find the plan of projects for UCAT and what they intend to use those federal funds for in order to provide the service within Ulster County. And again, those are going to be either bus purchases, facility improvements, or other equipment, operating and administration costs, and preventive maintenance. We're also part of the TMA, and I would be remiss if I didn't go into detail. The TMA is essentially it's an organization of the 3 counties. It's Dutchess, Orange, and Ulster. The 3 MPOs work very cooperatively. We meet pretty much, we communicate weekly and probably meet every other month. If you go to this website, it shows our latest ArcGIS hub page, which shows a lot of the main products that the TMA is responsible for. Very briefly, we're a creation because of the Poughkeepsie-Newburgh urbanized area, which was established in 22. The current population of that urbanized area is just under 444,000 people, but the total combined county population is 852,500. And that's, I believe, as of census 2020, yeah. So we share responsibilities for the distribution of funds and other planning requirements with Dutchess, Orange, and Ulster transportation councils. We distribute the 5307 funds cooperatively through agreement. We do what's called a congestion management process. And we are also responsible for air quality conformity, which does not fall necessarily to Ulster County because we don't have any serious air quality issues as defined by the Environmental Protection Agency. And we function through a very brief memorandum of understanding that was signed by the Ulster County Legislature in 2006. So, as I mentioned earlier, the TMA generates 5307 funds and 5339 funds. And so we distribute them collectively. But there are other entities that are eligible to receive those funds in the TMA. Those include the other public operators. And it also includes the Metropolitan Transit Authority, which is operating Metro North, obviously out of the Poughkeepsie station, heading south. And New Jersey, Passaic County, as you can see down here on the map, has a significant portion in this urbanized area as well. So all these different entities are eligible to receive those funds by a formula agreement. And it also, a lot of the funding is a significant amount of the funding is generated by the private operators because they're receiving subsidy to do that private operation. Trailways, Coach USA, and Leprechaun help to generate those funds on an annual basis. So once we do the distribution, each of these entities is eligible to receive the funding, but then there's typically funding left over, which we keep in an unallocated formula, the present balance of which is $28 million. And that funding can be used for future distributions on a competitive basis to any of those eligible recipients. And we recently, Ulster County Area Transit did apply for funding for the purchase of battery electric buses, which it received, and also for the design of new storage facilities for its fleet, which it received through that competitive funding source. So one of the questions that was provided to us was other sources of funding, potential sources of funding for transit service. So the TMA unallocated funds is probably the best additional source that we don't receive by right. It's not a formula that we automatically get. We have to apply for it competitively. And while the Ulster County Area Transit needs are significant locally, from our perspective, you have to keep in mind that the metropolitan, the NTA rather, transit agency has very significant capital needs into the near future in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's who we're competing against for those unallocated funds. There's other funding sources. There are more funding sources than I can probably cover in the course of an hour in any great detail, but I'll run through them quickly. We received significant federal supplemental and emergency relief funds after the coronavirus pandemic. There's the CARES Act, there's the Coronavirus Response Act. These provided funding that essentially kept the UCAT operation functioning during years 2020 and 2021 is what those funds were used for. And we also generate funding through the state legislature, provides state operating assistance through a formula that's provided to providers, and the formula distribution is shown there. I got that from the website. And then there's been additional supplemental funds that the New York State Legislature has created called the Modernization and Enhancement Program and Accelerated Transit Capital. These are state funding sources, so they're not necessarily even required to go through the MPO for approval, but they were made primarily in response to the transit crisis that's been occurring in the New York City metropolitan region. But rather than make those funds just available to New York City, they're also made available to public operators statewide through formula. Other discretionary sources, a discretionary source of funds is essentially it's a grant program that a public operator could apply for at their discretion, and it's usually competitive. FTA has discretionary programs they put out. It's usually there's an incentive. If Congress has decided they want to incentivize low emission buses or battery electric buses, they'll usually put a grant program out there. Haven't been any announced recently, but we always are on the lookout for those discretionary grant programs, and we can apply for them. And we've received some in the past. NYSERDA has put out discretionary programs. You may have heard of the microtransit planning proposal that the county partnered with VIA Transportation with recently. There's a NYSERDA opportunity that we saw. And the DEC sometimes has what's called their Cleaner Greener program as well. These are typically do not come up to the level of the FTA funding sources. They're usually much smaller in scale, but they are available to us as we can find them. And then there's the opportunity for local cost shares. SUNY New Paltz provides, I believe, SUNY provides significant funding to the village of New Paltz to provide their loop service in Ulster County. And that goes to the local match for providing that service locally. Obviously, Ulster County is providing a significant amount of support to keep our system operational at its current level of service. And there's always potential for private matches to help to buttress the service as well. I don't want to get into great detail here with this slide. I mean, one of the questions, Cheryl, that you had was, how do projects get started and initiated? You know, we have planning grants at the Transportation Council that we've utilized in the recent past to do transit studies. Those studies are always done in cooperation with UCAT and usually done at the request of UCAT. So we have an ability to fund planning projects, and they're usually consultant based. So when we did the Ulster County Transit Integration Study, when Kingston City Bus was integrated into the UCAT system, it was our office that did the planning study utilizing our FTA planning grant. We get an annual grant of roughly $50,000, and we save those dollars over time. And so when the need arises, we have the ability to do transit planning at the Transportation Council. And we also have a federal highway planning grant to do studies like the Building a Better Broadway project, the I-587 project. Roundabout was originally a planning study that was initiated by our office in 2006, and quite a few other neighborhood corridor level studies we have the ability to do through our federal highway grant.
So is there money in these planning grant lines to fund another transportation study?
Yes, certainly, and that is done. I'm going to stop the share right now.
Okay. Yeah, I was hoping, because I understand this is a 1 hour meeting, and we should give it time for some questions and answers.
Sure. And to answer that
Thank you,
question,
Laura. I had signaled that in the chat. But how many more slides are there, Brian?
I'm done. I just had.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So my first question, I'm going to ask the first question because I was at the UCTC meeting on Tuesday, and it was shared that the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, is going away for Ulster County due to a drop in our 2020 census numbers. So how will that affect our funding?
So, may I?
Yeah, please.
So first of all, I don't believe that's what was said. What we're concerned about is that the 2020 census changes some ways in terms of the way urbanized areas are defined, and we have not seen those definitions be applied to the MPO as of yet. We expect the census will release its urbanized areas late this fall. So we're not saying that the MPO will, quote, go away until we actually see what those urbanized areas come out with from the census. In addition, we have asked for and are hoping for, even if there is a change in the urbanized area definitions that would not allow us to meet the minimum thresholds, that there would be a hold harmless clause for those existing MPOs that are already in existence.
Okay, so we would be spared under that and we'd still have an MPO.
I don't want to say you're speaking in absolutes, and I'm speaking in essentially we don't know.
No, okay, but there is a potential. Okay, but we would be whole regardless of what came down. Do you think, Dennis?
You know,
we
had the MPO had provided testimony to the Census Bureau and to the Federal Highway Administration. So hopefully there's some listening with respect to that. If there is a situation that arises whereby we do not meet the minimum thresholds, then the next answer is to go to the congressional delegation and ask them to intervene on our behalf. So there are those things that could happen. Hopefully none of it will happen, and we'll meet the minimum thresholds.
Amen. Have people, do people have other specific questions from this presentation?
Phil has his hand raised, but also Laura had asked a question. I think it didn't get answered first.
Okay, thank you. So shall we?
Maybe Laura and then Phil.
Yeah, Laura's question was money for additional studies, and the answer is yes. And so that's done through our Unified Planning Work Program. Every October, our office puts out a call for planning projects that will go out this October. and we'll explain it in detail at the October meeting of the tech committee. And we always have capacity to take on new transportation planning projects with a few conditions. It needs a local municipal sponsor. We need a member of the council to sponsor the proposal. The application process is really straightforward. It's several pages. You just have to show what the transportation need is. So I always encourage folks to reach out to me. If there's a need and we think we need additional study, please reach out to me. We would love to discuss it.
And I would also say, going back to my original comment, was it has to go back and look at the long-range transportation plan. There has to have relevance. We don't do studies because somebody quote wants a study. They have to have a relevance to some of the data that we've collected or within the policies and programs that are in the long-range transportation plan.
And can we find that application online and then get
I'll make it online. It's not up now, but it will be
Okay.
soon.
Is there a copy of the 2021 application? And would they be very similar?
It'll be identical almost.
So can we get a copy of that?
Sure.
It's Phil's turn.
Okay, thanks. I have a number of questions. I'll start with the quick ones. And also thank you, Brian and Dennis, for presenting and joining us and agreeing to this. Are all of the MPOs TCs, or are there other MPOs that are not called transportation councils?
So an MPO is required to exist when you have an urbanized area of 50,000 or more. So all 14 MPOs in New York State are operating as a transportation council, essentially. Some are hosted by transit authorities in the big cities of Buffalo, Albany, Syracuse, Rochester. Those are hosted by the transit authorities, but the function is the same. And then within your larger areas, you have a transportation management area. We are the only TMA that I'm aware of in New York State that functions cooperatively with other MPOs. Typically, a TMA is solely within one MPO. So we're very unique, not only in New York State, but in the country, that we have such a functional cooperative agreement with two other MPOs for the TMA.
Okay, I'll think about that and more. I might have a follow-up later. Do we know why only urbanized areas have to have these MPOs?
Yeah, it's set forth by Congress. As I said in the beginning of the presentation, it was first put in the legislation in 1962. And then every year through the Authorization Act, the role of the MPO is expanded by Congress. So if you follow those links, you can learn more. I mean, the main purpose is to provide greater oversight into the expenditure of federal transportation dollars. I think if you go back in history and you look at the way some transportation projects were planned and implemented, particularly when they divided communities and cities. Robert Moses comes to mind very often with a lot of these huge projects that may have been great for moving cars, but they weren't great for neighborhoods. There is pushback eventually, and I think Congress recognized that the DOTs needed an additional level of oversight for the expenditure of federal dollars, and that is partly why the MPO was created, to give more local say in the expenditure of those dollars.
So I think the other thing, Phil, is you should be aware of, and everyone should be aware of, is that the Transportation Council does not confine its efforts to the urbanized areas. When we formed the Transportation Council, we have an opportunity to establish two things. One is the sense of where you get your authority to exist, which is within the urbanized areas, and then where is your planning area. And we've extended our planning area to include the entire county. It actually, quite frankly, goes into, I think, 4 census blocks in Greene County as well.
Yeah, so we can do a study anywhere in Ulster County. It doesn't have to be just in that urbanized area.
And if you remember the map that Brian put up, there is a TMA area, which is the Mid-Hudson TMA, which is an urbanized area, otherwise known as UZ 89. and then there's an urbanized area, which is the Kingston urbanized area, and they do not connect. So you have two urbanized areas that exist in Ulster County. And the other MPOs that are involved in the urbanized area that is known as the Mid-Hudson urbanized area have agreed that for the urbanized area that exists in Ulster County, the Transportation Council of Ulster County would take planning responsibilities for that. It's a very unique situation in the state. There's not another MPO in this, another urbanized area in the state that's represented by 3 MPOs.
And there's only a handful nationwide that operate like that.
Thank you. I had more
thanks.
questions, but I see others have hands up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so if that's okay, we can go to Deborah and then come back for more questions from you.
All right, thank you all. And again, I'm happy to be here. I'm a resident of the city of Newburgh in Orange County. And everything I was listening to pertains to Ulster County in its own way. My question is, did we have a transit committee here in the city of Newburgh, but by me attending, I'm getting nowhere. So my purpose of being here this afternoon with you all is to find out, do I approach my county legislator in my district about the transportation issues here? Because city council and our mayor is telling me you have to go to the county or you go to our transportation committee. Our transportation committee is nowhere near what's going on here on the screen this afternoon. I'm not afraid to say that because I do use public transportation to get to and from my office, as well as shopping and things of that nature. So again, I should reach out to my local county legislator.
So,
And you probably know who it is, Darian and Ramos, Catherine Darian and Genesis Ramos here in the city of Newburgh.
so let me just give you a sense of what ends up happening in Orange County, although it may be undergoing transformation. Orange County as an entity does not operate a transit system. So where you're looking at Ulster County spends, not only owns its own transit system, but also expends significant county dollars with respect to the transit system. Orange County effectively does not operate a transit system. It relies on its municipalities to operate the transit system. They have a contractual relationship with the municipalities, and the MPO in Orange County funds the individual municipalities. The short answer is it works for Orange County. It's not the best way to coordinate transportation from one place to another. It becomes more of a neighborhood transportation system rather than a transportation system that gets you from point A to point B. The reason I say it's undergoing changes, and we know that there's discussions that are happening that may involve Orange County being more involved in coordinating the transit systems within the county. Orange County is also fortunate that it has a short line, or Coach USA runs substantial amounts of service within the county. Whereas in Ulster County, Trailways only runs service in the Route 32 corridor and the Route 28 corridor within the county. So the short answer to your question is yes, you should go to your legislature. The other thing is you can have a discussion with the MPO in Orange County to have a conversation about how to better coordinate transit systems among the number of providers. I believe in Orange County is what they call the designated recipient, but it doesn't run the system. So it manages somewhere in the neighborhood of about 16 separate systems in Orange County. And it's been a difficult situation for the county for quite a period of time. And we've been just the opposite at the county. We've essentially gone through and established our own county transit system. And not only that, when we recognized that there were difficulties between the two transit systems, which is the city of Kingston and UCAT, we moved to essentially coordinate the systems and eventually take them over. So
but
now
let me just say this to you. We have the Newburgh transit system here in the city of Newburgh. I live in the city of Newburgh.
Yeah.
I'm aware that short line goes through the town to town to get to New York City. That's what our short line does up here, as far as I know, and as far as Albany. What I'm saying in the whole pertaining to the city of Newburgh, okay, our transportation system here, Newburgh Transit, It's Monday to Saturday, 7 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. That's it. That's it. It's not serving the public here who works on Sunday, who choose to shop on Sunday any good. That's why I'm listening to what you're advising me. I never knew of an NPO for Orange County. So if you could put that in the chat for me, that will be very helpful. Phil, I know County Legislator Ramos very well, if you will. To all of y'all, I know her very well. Not I will be seeing her this evening, but I'm just saying, is she the right one to go after instead of me running back and forth to City Hall, getting the same results, the
Gotta go
same
to work.
story, different results?
We've got, okay. Is there like a yes or no to that?
Can you give me the NPO of Orange County?
Yeah,
If you
it's
can in the chat,
Orange
please.
County Transportation Council, and I can provide contacts with them. They're great to work with.
We'll
Thank you.
provide it back to Cheryl.
Yep.
Thanks.
I-
And I just wanted to say, yeah, Cheryl, there's only a couple minutes left, right?
And yeah, and Clark's got his hand up, so I.
Great. And Phil had some more questions. Not sure if people can, if you're able to stay a little later, Brian and Dennis, or Phil and Clark.
Dennis has a hard.
No, I have to go to work.
I gotta get back to a meeting as
Yeah.
well, but I can hang out for another couple minutes.
Okay. So Clark, would you like to ask your question? And then we'll go back to Phil.
And if we can keep everything pretty brief.
Oh,
Thanks.
I get what, 2 minutes? I just was curious to find out. So the federal and state funding doesn't fund UCAT, you're saying, Brian?
No, UCAT uses it uses all the federal funding that is made available to it. It's roughly $3.5 million a year in federal funds.
Okay, and the latest, the free ride, so that doesn't affect our potential revenue?
So let me take that if I can. So the county was very careful in reaching out and having that discussion with respect to what I would call a user-free ride, not a free ride. And the county will be basically providing the dollar amount for those rides within its own budget. And what that does, it helps us preserve some of the funding formulas which are based on ridership.
Okay.
So we will continue to count
Yeah, I just
riders.
have
And we'll continue
one
to
more
pay those
question.
Riders, it just won't be the riders themselves making those payments.
Right, just one more question. So this council actually administrates like the budget for UCAT as far as like,
No.
no. So
No.
how does Kingston Plaza, I mean, historically, this is the way we had our bus system. And Dennis, I remember your meeting, I even got a recording of you saying how bad the city bus was, and now it's merged with everybody. Nothing has really changed. We have a bus system in a fire lane and down in the Kingston Plaza. I mean, who takes responsibility? Is it the council or is it the city of Kingston?
So
I just don't.
the service routes are essentially controlled at the level within the legislature and within UCAT itself.
Well, that's what I want to know. Who speaks for me?
And we'll do studies relative to those service routes to make sure that we can to help optimize them when requested. But what I would say to you right now is that transit is going to go through what I would think is a significant look at data. When we move to a user-free ride, we do not know what's going to happen with respect to that in terms of demand or in terms of where people are going to want to go that they're currently not going. So we would anticipate that.
Well, I would say there's a need for a study. I relate to Laura. There is a need when you have several buses parked in a fire lane down in the plaza, which is going to cause, liability.
We would anticipate that we're going to see a look at the routing structure for a couple of reasons. One is the free ride issue. One is the fact that the nature of the need for transit is changing. And 2 and 3 is we have moving towards electric buses are going to essentially affect our routing structure as well, given where they can and cannot go on a single charge.
Right. Well, I've heard they can't even go out the city of Kingston. Is that true?
They're
I can't answer,
restricted.
I can't answer that
Okay.
question.
Yeah, the types of routes that they're able to operate a battery electric bus are restricted based on geography. Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Rachel again, just, again, respectful of everyone's time. Would it be possible to set up a meeting with you so we could pull together more questions that people have, especially after the presentation?
So I guess my question is we're more than willing to have conversations, but if we're getting into the nuts and bolts of the transit system, those questions should be directed to the transit operator.
Right.
All right, thank you. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Thank you for coming and speaking and sharing your information.
No problem.
I think we can go back to Phil.
Okay, thanks.
I should just, we have a meeting that we do have to get to that actually involves our transit provider that we're running late on. If we could wrap it up, we'd appreciate it.
So, I mean, if we can pull together some more questions, Phil, Laura, and, everyone here, I think if we can collect them up and send them over to you, if there's ones that are not within the things that you can answer, you could maybe let us know right away, and then, but we can then have another conversation. I think it would be really helpful.
Yeah.
I didn't give them the very UCAT specific questions, getting into the details and drilling down in the data, because that's something we want to give UCAT the opportunity to provide first. So I really tried to parse out what would be a bigger picture kind of questions that would impact UCTC and planning, more or less. But we still have a list of questions that were in the invite that Brian has, so we can get. Would you guys like to do the, maybe you should suggest to us a future forum to continue this?
Well, for me, it's difficult to gauge where you want to go, given the fact that we're getting specific questions. And so we're down into, you want to go down into details, but I want to go back up and say, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And so it's a lot easier to say, this is the mission of what the ridership group is about, and this is what it's trying to accomplish, and this is our biggest, here are our biggest concerns, where rather than to sit back and say, how does this get funded? How does that get funded? How does this get, what about this? What about that? For me, it's sort of like, what is your strategic objective that you're trying to accomplish, and how can we help you understand whether you can accomplish it or not accomplish it, rather than have these specific questions on that. And I'll just leave that out there. The other thing I would say is that for me, one of the more difficult things that an MPO has to deal with is sort of, how does it reach down into the low and moderate income community and engage them in the process? So I don't know your makeup, I don't know who you represent, right? But we're trying to essentially find out a better way to reach into that low and moderate income user, the transit users out there, and the low and moderate income community. And so my sense would be, it would be very helpful if you could say to us, these are our strategic goals. And B is, if you could say to us, here's who you're not talking to, right? And how best to talk to those individuals, because that's how we make progress. I mean,
Great, but who's speaking for us though?
So
Wait.
Carol, could you have the last word? Then we gotta go. We're really,
Yeah. I thank you all, you guys, very much. We will take the rest of the discussion offline. And yes, we would like to have those bigger bigger discussions, but this was very helpful to us, I believe, to kind of ground us into reality. Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. And I look forward to talking again sometime soon. All right.
Absolutely. This is
Thank
very,
you.
very productive. And I think we can help you with reaching that population.
Even better. Great.
I mean, I
Alright.
think we're here for that.